writers and so on. And so there's a whole forgotten history of Freemasonry in Palestine that I think is important to recover this stuff and not let it be trashed by history in this sort of fanatical thing. Now, there are some difficult questions to answer and research in this commentary I'm doing, which is, for instance, the peace treaty on offer by Trump and Netanyahu is premised on that the Palestinians will somehow magic Hamas away. It will vanish and they'll just no longer be in charge of Gaza or anywhere else, and they will just vanish away. Now, you know, that is okay. I mean, it would require a Moses crossing the Dead Sea type miracle the Red Sea, to magic away Hamas like that. No, Hamas has arisen out of the causes of Hamas. And what I say in the document is we have to look at the causes and find out what they are. If we're going to be healers, we have to understand, diagnose the cause of the illness, then cure it. Hamas has arisen out of at least two causes that I can analyse. One is the frustration and upset and sorrow and suffering of the Palestinian people themselves, feeling neglected by history, let down by the world, the entire world effectively, and lied to and offered a peace treaty in the Oslo Peace Accords of '94, but then it was totally reneged on and never been implemented. And then their state has been chipped away at, their land, more and more settlements built. Nobody seems to care about them. And they're offered, so Hamas arose to fill that void as a spokesperson. The details of that are very interesting because at a certain point, Arafat himself had been pro the Oslo Peace Accords and had made a decision to make peace with Israel. You know, great price to him because many of his Fatah fighters and resistance workers were saying, you can never trust the Israelis, don't make peace. But he said, no, we've signed the Oslo Accords, we'll stick to them. He signed them with Rabin, and we'll do it. Now, what seems to have happened, and this is really shocking, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but I have to say the truth as I figured it out as I go along. I'm the Sherlock Holmes of peace, right? It looks as if the Israelis, with some probably international help, I don't know, American, British, God knows what, killed off Arafat. He was poisoned with a very, very sophisticated polonium type poison. According to the forensic doctors that examined his pajamas and hair samples from the hospital in Paris where he died, he came down with an illness that was conformable to polonium poisoning of a particular kind. And there's a documentary, it's on YouTube, and it was shown on television. His wife, Zuha, was invited to help with, and had the pajamas he had in hospital and so on. So this made it possible to analyse them. And it looks like he was murdered because that's not kind of stuff you pick up in a hospital normally, polonium poisoning. And it's not something that any individual could have done or someone with a grudge. This is stuff that can only be made by a state which has nuclear technology to make that stuff. And that means only nuclear states, right? And that means Israel, France, Russia, USA, etc. And so of those, you then say, well, who's got most to benefit and gain if this chap dies? Well, it doesn't take Abelard to work out, the shortest route is to say, well, probably Israel had a role in that. I mean, that's where logic leads you, and I'm sorry, as a Abelardian running the World Intellectual Forum, here in France, near Paris, I have a duty to use logic. So it looks like, folks, that Israel did actually kill off the one guy that could have delivered peace. Because for all his sins, and he was a flawed guy like we all are, but he had made a commitment to peace and he was standing by it. I mean, his wife is a Christian, right? I mean, he had a vision of what Palestine would look like, a place of generosity and magnanimity and living in peace with Israel. So why on earth, I mean, this is something that really annoys me, right? Why on earth did someone in the Israeli state think, I know what we'll do to make peace, we'll kill off the guy that's planned it and working with us, the one guy we can really trust, we'll kill him off. I mean, that's just as stupid as if you want to sign the death warrant to the whole peace process. Well, probably they did. It's very probable that the people behind that killing were the very merchants of death, the military-industrial complex sword arm that want to silence people like me, the peace people, because they don't want peace. They want continual war because it's good for their arms sales. Well, I'm sorry, folks, that's not acceptable. Time you warriors and your factory owners, go back into your caves. Go back to Tartarus, because we the people demand peace now. I mean, thank you for all the fancy kit. It's great. We love all these missiles and drones. But from now on, you have to use them for peaceful purposes, not for this killing stuff. And we the people demand peace, right? So even though, poor Yasser Arafat died, what he prayed for and lived for towards the end of his life, we must deliver on it still. The thing is that what happened then, so Arafat died, and 2 years after his death, Hamas took over in Gaza. Now, there's a lot of indication that very possibly the same forces within the covert forces, that saw to the death of Arafat, also engineered or helped engineer the rise of Hamas. So the same people that killed off the spokesman of peace have now engineered a force that is at loggerheads with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and the PLO's national government of Palestine. Because the Hamas are much more Islamic, much more Islamist, I should say, much more entrenched in their Israel position, much more for eternal war. They're like the kind of warrior elite of, that position. Why on earth would Israel want to support the rise of a group like that? That's surely the complete opposite of what they should be doing. Well, yes, of course, if you're rational, if you're moderate, if you have an intellectual capacity to work out how to proceed to get peace on the planet, yes. But no, these people don't. They're extremists. They have a, total bee in their bonnet that it's, everyone is an enemy. And I mean, in the Likud type of worldview, and where they come from, literally, there are quotes from the founders saying, everyone is an enemy. Just regard everyone as an enemy. You can use any means, fair or foul, to defeat them. And so creating Hamas, it's a great diversionary thing. And what is said, some intelligence agents working for Britain and abroad have said, yes, it was a deliberate Israeli thing to split the Palestinians. So they knew by empowering Hamas that would weaken the PLO. And that's what's happened. The Palestinian National Government, which is supposed to have a legislature, like a parliament, hasn't met for a few years because the people are split between whether they support Hamas or the PLO. It's totally bifurcated Palestinian public opinion. Many people think Hamas is the answer and a stricter and stronger approach. Others still stick with the PLO, and it's paralysed the nation. So when this peace document says, we'll only give you this peace if Hamas vanish and disappear, what I pointed out in my commentary is the irony and the paradox and the discourtesy of that, if you've had a hand in creating them in the first place. Do your Abelard research on this, and it's just not logical. Therefore, it leads to the conclusion in some analysis that it's a deliberate hoax, this peace document, not intended to create peace. It's intended to create the conditions of looking as if you want peace. So then you can blame the other for when the peace doesn't happen. Well, that's not legitimate procedure in conflict resolution work. And I'm just pointing this out as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You can't act like that and hope that nobody notices, because we are noticing. We can see what's going on here. So I'm saying, okay, in spite of that, and in spite of the fact that it may all be a smokescreen, let's look at the document, let's find the, whatever, the, 50% of it that's really good, like the port, the railway, and there's loads of funding promised. There's support for Palestinian schools and education, which I as a teacher love. I'm proposing we should create a peace university in Jerusalem for both Israelis and Palestinians. And I'm proposing that in the curriculum of all Israeli schools and all Palestinian schools should be peace education and non-violence. And I'm saying educators like me around the planet can help write that together. Thank you. Cheer loudly. Let's do it. So let's call the bluff of people that say the document, no, it's just a fake thing. No, it's got some really good bits in it. Let's keep those. It's kind of like your muesli after you've been out in a sandstorm. You've got to get the sand out somehow, filter it out, and keep the nice muesli. Otherwise, you're going to starve to death. So anyway, that's that. I'm just reporting, and it's very exciting, and I feel positive. I know Trump and Netanyahu are both pretty roguish, and they have a very bad press, and deservedly so. They've done criminal kinds of deeds. And even Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, who's probably responsible for writing a lot of it, his dad was in prison for witness prosecution, all kinds of dodgy stuff, These are not particularly, they're not what I call moral people. But that doesn't mean that the work they're doing can't lead to good fruits. I think that, let's pray. The Kushner's family also, they were Holocaust survivors and stuff, So nothing is totally black and white. We're talking about a project that could, if it can be tweaked and commented on and analysed and studied, if we can get the experts to really look at this, then we could get a peace out of this between Israel and Palestine. So I'm going to cheer for it. Anyway, there we are. That's my first thing I want to report. Next thing I want to report on is to change the subject, but not entirely. Also this week, I've been finally finishing and publishing my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies. Okay. Now, some of you know that I'm a Druid. Well, maybe you don't know what that is. A Druid is an old word for the Celtic seers or sages who kept wisdom for the tribe. They did the mediations, they did the peacemaking, they did the education, they were the teachers, they were the judges, they were the philosophers, they taught science and cosmology, and they were the literary figures. Only it was an oral culture, so they entertained people in the evening. The bardic wing of the Druids, which was incredibly important, told the stories of the ancient heroes of old and the gods and so on. And this goes back to the Bronze Age. This is very, very ancient. It's as old as Homer and earlier in ancient Greece and Mycenae. And the roots are very, very deep. And in this encyclopedia, which is 1,194 pages, I had to split it into 3 volumes to publish it, is everything that I've been studying and finding out about the last 40 years of my life. I've been on a sort of endless quest, like starting out as a young apprentice, and I walked to Stonehenge in 1974, I think it was. And in those days you could just, go and sit by the stones. There was no fence or anything. And I loved it. And I was on a kind of Druid quest at the time, and it's been going on ever since. So I discovered the Druids believed in reincarnation. They were like the yogis of the Celtic culture, and my island, Britain, and Gaul, and Europe. And most of the Druids were all over, not just Britain and Ireland, but Scotland and Wales, and Gaul, and Brittany, and all down the Rhine Valley, and Belgium, and northern Italy. There were very strong Celtic and Druidical centres, including Milan, which was founded by the Celts. So I've been doing all this research for the last 2 years, adding in new knowledge about the Druids of Gaul and France, and it's vast what I've discovered. I feel like a miner that's wandered into the goldfields and found a diamond mine. Like whoever found the Kimberley gold, diamond fields must have felt. So And I'm just sharing it because I'm a generous kind of guy and I love giving away knowledge and wisdom. That's my teaching role. These Druids are amazing. They deserve to be known about and studied and taught. So I've called it the Encyclopedia of Druid Studies because there isn't such a discipline as Druid Studies. There are Druid orders that will train aspects of Druidry. There are loads of books on Druidry you can buy, how to be a Druid type of books. But, and then there are kind of books about Celtic studies that go into the ancient Irish literature and folk stories and mythology. And there are books, a few books by religious studies experts on aspects of Celtic mythology and religion. There's some good sources out there. And then there's some really interesting new archaeological work on new discoveries in Celtic archaeology that are being made in Europe and Britain as we speak. But what nobody's done before is put all this stuff together into one, encyclopedia. And there's some good encyclopedias of Celtic studies. John Koch has done some good work. But this is different. This is an encyclopedia of Druid studies. It sits in parallel. And what I've done is I've always explored the links between Druidry and other faiths, like Christianity. Because most of the Druids of Britain and Ireland and Gaul became Christian. But it was a subcurrent running through Christianity that kept, the ancient Druid wisdom alive, like the Gnostic or the Hermetic wisdom of Christianity, like Pelagius and the Gnostic traditions were very Druidical. Priscillian in Spain was a Druid Christian, for instance. And he was the first guy executed for being a heretic in the history of the church by the sword arm of the emperor. God, thousands of, well, actually they say millions of witches and pagans died later. He was the first ever. And yet, interestingly, Druidry itself was never declared a heresy. You see, most of the very clever Christian theologians and thinkers, both in Ireland and Europe, were strongly touched by the Druidical sources of their own culture, like John Scotus Erigena and many of the savants of Ireland and Britain and Wales and so on, go back to St. David. These are all Druidical, but they were now Druid Christians. So the encyclopedia looks at all that lot. Patrick, for instance, in his wonderful heroic invocation of the Trinity, he says, I take the Trinity as my shield and my protector. Well, the Trinity was a Druid idea. The Druids worshipped what I call a tritheistic approach to reality. They knew that things come in threes, and so the triads, the earliest poetry we have from Britain, are threes. The sign of the Arwen is three rays of light. The Druids were tritheists, and this influenced early Christian theology. Hilary of Poitiers, which was a Druid foundation, Poitiers, the Pictavi tribe, not far from where I'm based and speaking to you, they thought in threes. So, of course, the Trinity is a threefold thing. This goes back also to the same roots, ultimately, as the Hindu Trinity, the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, the three great, unbelievably powerful energies, which are also all one, And it's the same with the Christian understanding of the Trinity. So Christ is an incarnation of that absolute, but is also one person of the absolute. So, he's the incarnation of Shiva, if you want to use Hindu theology, but is also the three. Well, that's all totally understandable from a Druid perspective, right? Which is why you get amazing links, which I've explored in the encyclopedia, between the Druids and the Hindus. When the British get to India, they fall in love because they're speaking the same language. Sir William Jones, who was a Druid, spoke Welsh, trained at the University of Oxford, a lawyer, but passionately in love with learning and knowledge and poetry. He went to India. He fell in love with Indian culture and civilization. And he recognized it as his own, ultimately. He learned Sanskrit. He got a Brahmin in to teach him it. And he realized the languages of Wales and Latin and Greek and English were all connected to Sanskrit. He coined the phrase Indo-European to describe this family he discovered. And he wrote a huge epic poem in Druid style when the gods of Wales and Britain make peace with the gods of India and the Himalayas. because they're the same gods. William Jones was the cleverest British resident. Sadly, he died. He should have gone on living. He died and he's buried in Calcutta. I went close to the tomb when I was there to pay homage. So there's all that too in the encyclopedia. There's so much that it's just so exciting. There's John Toland's story told in full. He was an absolute extraordinary polymath. Toland was Irish. He was deeply in love with the ancient Irish legend, mythology, traditions. He loved, archaeology. He'd been around all the monuments and so on. He went to Oxford and he met John Aubrey, and he was very interested in the Druid revival of the 1600s and John Aubrey's work and so on. And he kind of wanted to see Druidry come back. He wanted to, get local lodges going. And he was very interested in Freemasonry, which was active at the time. And he reckoned the Freemasons were just like Johnny-come-latelys. It was the Druids had been the first seers. These Freemasons were just sort of building teams that had come in. But they were brothers and, should be respected. Anyway, he was a polymath. He then set off around Europe. He came to live in France. He went through all the libraries. He was at the University of Oxford studying away and attending meetings. It said he attended the Druid lodges there with Aubrey. Nobody quite knows, the history. And then he wrote a wonderful book in the end about the history of Druidry. And another famous book, Christianity Not Mysterious. He tried to reconcile his Christian faith with Druidry, so he's a kind of Christian Druid. And he was Catholic by upbringing and Protestant. He was an ecumenical Christian like me, who felt that those labels, Catholic, Protestant, and so on, they're just like phases of the moon. You don't say the moon is full or the moon is new. I mean, it's both and. So the Christian phenomena is both Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant and Gnostic. They're all just different phases of the moon, right? And they're all here on my my periodic table of the world's religions, because as you know, I've got all the different denominations. These Christians are in blue. The Druids are up here in the green, which are the pagan or primal ones. Anyway, it's been a labour of love to do it, and I've really enjoyed it. I get really high on intellectual work. I'm a jnani yogi, and so I'm offering it. Get a copy. It's epic, 3 volumes, and I think it'll blow your mind. It's blown my mind to research this stuff. The things I keep finding are just cosmically interesting, and I don't think they're only interesting to people who are Druids. I think these are genuinely interesting things that are revealed when we go back into, because what I'm doing is connecting up from very ancient prehistory up to our contemporary era. And I'm really arguing as a kind of Jungian, my thesis in transpersonal history, is that the traces laid down by earlier generations, say the old Druids of Europe or Britain, they're still resonating in the collective unconscious. That initial light is still around, and we can plug into it even though we live thousands of years later. This is what is said in other traditions, like in the Shinto tradition of Japan, which is essentially Japanese Druidry, and it stayed in situ. The Japanese never lost it. They accepted Buddhism as the Druids accepted Christianity, but they preserved their Shinto nature-based faith, in which everything is permeated with the kamis, the spirits of the place. And I think the Druids had identical. In fact, in the book, the encyclopedia, I go into the links between Shintoism and the Ainu culture of northern Japan, which goes back to the Paleolithic cultures, circumpolar cultures, who were bear hunters and bear worshippers. And the cult of the bear is important in Druidry. Arthur means the bear king. And these people were, didn't worship, but they revered the energy of the bear. And that's why they call the stars, the Great Bear, because they go around the pole star, and that's our home sign. And so they greatly respected, the force of the bear. But and that goes back to the Paleolithic cultures of the Pyrenees, who the cave bear was the single biggest and most fierce enemy that our ancestors had to face as human beings. It made us, really. And so the Celts, I think the Druids, inherited the wisdom of all those Paleolithic tribes going back to the Magdalenian period. In the encyclopedia, I've gone into the archaeology of this and I've explained how and why I've come to that conclusion. I don't buy this idea the Druids just came in lately, with Iron Age. No, they arose in situ with the indigenous wisdom and knowledge of Paleolithic, European and British cultures. All the same thing. In those days, it was joined up. There was no channel, and that's the wisdom of this place, this region. So it's the native wisdom of Europe, and absolutely fascinating. So I just want to end with a little story. So do look at it. I think anyone with a love of history and archaeology and spirituality and peace is going to love this encyclopedia. That's why I've done it as a labour of love. And it's my offering to the world. Now I want to finish with a little sign. So this is a little story because as a Druid I'm very interested in synchronicities. I keep a kind of diary of meaningful synchronicities, right? And they happen, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Jung coined the word. So they're meaningful coincidences that kind of align events beyond the normal laws of time and space and causality. They point to the overarching womb of consciousness that holds the matrix bubble of time and space. We're just in the womb of the great goddess, so to speak. So anyway, I'm working on this encyclopedia. I finished it earlier today, and I'm doing the last entry of volume 2, which is on the Parisi tribe, and who gave their name to Paris. And they were an interesting tribe. They were quite important, and I love Paris. It's just up the road, and I point out that it's the centre of, a lot of intellectual work. It's where the Paris Peace Forum is going. It has a whole tradition of intellectual labour, and I've created the World Intellectual Forum European branch. We're connected. We met in Paris, and so I do a bit of speculating in the encyclopedia. I say, and I mean it, is it possible that the tribe, the Parisi, were related to the Farsi, or the Persians, as they're called, because their tribe also was Farsi or Parsi. And I just do a little musing, because the encyclopedia is full of these joined up juxtapositions of things. Both the Celts and the Parisi tribe and the ancient Persians spoke Indo-European language, and maybe I think absolutely certainly they go back to a common root. And Zoroaster, which was the religion of the Persians, is very similar to Druidry. It's a reverence for nature, for earth, air, fire and water, for the holiness of fire particularly, but also water. All the elements are sacred. And above all for Asher, for righteousness. You can't be a Zoroastrian and be stupid or wicked or evil. It's about righteousness, Asher, who is the goddess, with Ahura Mazda, the great Lord of Light. And the Persians, the priests of the indigenous Farsi tradition, of which Zoroaster was merely one. He didn't invent Zoroastrianism. That's ridiculous. That's like, no, he was a priest of the original tradition of the Farsi, which was effectively what I call Druidry. And the word we know existed because in the Vedic traditions, just further on, the word Dharma existed. And that was the name for the absolute truth. So the Druid is the seer of the absolute truth, the Dharma. Well, that was true also in the Farsi language. Dur, there are variants of it in Farsi. It comes in the Avestan texts. That which is truly enduring, that which remains. And so I just speculate, and I just leave that one hanging there, because this encyclopedia, by the way, is not the last ever, the best ever, the only Encyclopedia of Druid Studies. Gosh no. It's simply a rallying call for scholars to get in on this job because it's more than one person can do. We need specialists in many fields of knowledge, linguistics, anthropology, even psychedelic studies, because we know the Druids were using psychedelics for trained noumenal experiences, and now there's loads of people studying all that, which is fascinating. University of Greenwich is the world centre for psychedelic research, has conferences, or one of, and so that's another branch of Druid studies, as it were. Now I isolate all these in the text, and so Zoroastrian stuff, so I leave that one hanging. I then point out that the Parisi of Yorkshire, the tribe, the same tribe with a similar name, was active in Yorkshire, and they just found a burial in a place called Pocklington in Yorkshire with a full chariot and horses buried, with the burial, the guy, I think it was a man, and the burial was done in a way that the chariot was obviously like leaping up. It was trying to take off. Now, why did they bury their bodies with their chariots? The reason is because they knew that in the afterlife you go on travelling. And these druids and the warriors, they got the full-on burial treatment. They were going travelling, so they took their chariots with them. And it was a symbolic way of saying to the person you love, you know, don't worry, he's going on to the Hemmerwells, the Summerlands, with his chariot, you know, and you could see them going across the sky. And that's how they thought and what they did. So that's what, and we've just found this burial of a chariot in Pocklington in Yorkshire, and it's identical to ones in the Arras culture in the Champagne region of northern France, where they also buried people with the chariots. I speculate in the encyclopedia, when I talk about links between Druidry and the Kabbalah, that this is one of the sources for the Jewish idea of the Merkava mysteries, the chariot mysteries which happen. That was the origins of the Kabbalah. Read Gershom Scholem about it. And that's the Enoch journey to heaven. Okay. How's that possible? Well, because they were using chariots too. They were not fools. They travelled about. There were Celts in Turkey, what is now Turkey, Anatolia. The Hittite culture had similar equivalents to Druids, and we know that Abraham had met Hittites. He bought the land for the cave at Mashpelah from a Hittite, you know. So of course he's discussing Druid type stuff, and Abraham came from Edessa or Sanlerfa in northern Mesopotamia, not southern Mesopotamia. That was a mistake by Leonard Woolley. He was from northern Mesopotamia, so he was meeting Hittites, and he was learning about the chariot mysteries, no doubt about it. And that is what, you know, the Kabbalah is growing from. So in the encyclopedia, I'm exploring all this, and then I raise another thing, because I say, well, what about Paris? I've always had a great soft spot for Homer's stories. As a boy, my mother made me read Homer, and I in turn asked my daughter to read Homer when she went to university, and I don't think she regretted it. Everyone should read Homer, both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And of course we all know the tragedy behind the story is that Paris, a Trojan prince, was offered to choose between three goddesses. Athena, representing wisdom, Hera, representing wealth and success, and Aphrodite, representing love and passion and beauty. Well, you know, it was an impossible choice, and he chose, as you know, Aphrodite. Wrong choice, because although he got Helen, and for a time it looked great, you know, it led to the tremendous Trojan War and the catastrophe of history that's been going on ever since. Wars between East and West. When I went to Troy as a peace druid,